Hi, it's Simon Pugh-Jones here, and I'm very happy to be doing a talk for the Suffolk Orchid Society. I'm really sorry I'm not there in person, as in live, and apologies for mixing up dates, etc. But what I'd like to do is give you a tour of our nursery here on Portland, and also talk a bit about how we grow our orchids and how the growing that we do relates to the tropical rainforests we've explored. But first things first, I will take you down to the nursery. So let's see, I don't know if you can see in that direction. So here is our nursery. We've got half an acre of limestone grassland looking down towards the sea and two large greenhouses. Let's go and find out what's in them. I'll try not to make anyone too dizzy with all the moving around, but we'll see where we get to. And if I trip over on the way to the greenhouse, I guess that'll add to your entertainment. Here we go. So I'm going to go into our largest greenhouse. Because we live right by the sea, our greenhouses are rhinos, and they're the only ones that are strong enough to cope with the winds we get here on the island of Portland. Right, I'll take you inside and give you a little show around. So this is our cloud forest greenhouse. So what we've got is a greenhouse that is 20 by 12. And in here we grow plants from cloud forests. So that's the forest of South America, Central America, and also the cloud forests of Africa and Asia, because there's quite a few all over. I'm going to find you a couple of plants to look at. Let's head down this way. It's obviously end of February at the moment, so we've not got shading on the greenhouse. But this is a greenhouse we shade well later in the year. These are our Rinca Steely Rossii, which are looking particularly fine at the moment. And we have a great diversity of Pleurophthallis species in here, including this Stelis aprica, and down below Scaphocephalum verrucosum. That's a plant that's been in flower with us since the early 90s. We think 1993 when we got the plant, and it's flowered ever since. It's been divided a few times, again, without ever stopping flowering. So quite a good value plant. And if you have a quick look at how we grow things here, we've got shelves. So by growing our plants in 3 shelves, what we're able to do is to provide different conditions, obviously much cooler and damper at the bottom and drier and warmer at the top. So we can partly do that to cope with the requirements of different plants. And obviously, if we've just propagated something, we've got places we can keep it. I'm going to spin around and head back this way. In the center of the greenhouse, you'll notice we've got mesh with plants growing mounted and in baskets. And again, we've got a massive range of conditions here. So up at the top, it's actually rather warm and much drier. And that's where we grow our Barkarias. Here's Barkaria skinneri, doing fantastically at the moment. And if I go around the other side, it's also the place where we've got lots of things resting for the winter. So up above my head, there's our Dendrobium aphyllums, which will be flowering soon. And that's their cooler, drier winter. Let me find something else. Okay, so also near the top is where we can grow plants that like lots of light. So here are a classic cloud forest species. Here's our Cattleya coccinea doing really well. And next to it, we've got Cattleya wittigiana and Trichoglottis pusilla. So obviously the coccinea comes from Brazil, whereas the Trichoglottis comes from Southeast Asia, but actually very similar habitats of cool, damp forest, and they seem to grow really well together. I will have a look later at how we water and what conditions we provide in our greenhouse, but I wanted to give you a nice feel for what's in here. We've also got flowering at the moment our Maxillaria porphyra stele, which is always really good at this time of year. I'm going to try and find some other miniature orchids. I showed you one Stelis the other side. We've got Stelis reginae flowering here. And we've also got Oncidium neutzlianum flowering up in the top there. We've got about 500 species in total. And yeah, the largest proportion of those is in here in our cloud forest greenhouse. But let me take you to our second greenhouse. We'll see what's going on there. think we'll probably find Annie in there working with plants, ready for the shows we've got coming up this next month. So here's our second greenhouse. This one we call the Himalayas, but that doesn't mean it's restricted to Himalayan plants, but it's for plants that can take it really quite cool. So the cloud forest greenhouse we've just been into has a minimum of 12, whereas this greenhouse we've got here, I'll come around the other side, this greenhouse here, with, as I said, Annie doing a bit of propagating there, is kept at a minimum of 7. And it's got plants such as up in the top, our Lelia anceps plants, which really relish this. And we've got lots of the Himalayan species we really love. So we've got our Coelogene cristatus, we've got Dendrobium nobile. So our cristatas aren't flowering quite yet. We're hoping they'll be out for the RHS show in Wisley. Over on this side, we grow lots of our Australian dendrobiums. This one here is Dendrobium ellen. And I think we've got Adai just come into flower. Let me bring that across so you can see it. There we are, there's Dendrobium Adai. A lovely group of plants that grow really well in amongst the plants of the Himalayas, like our Cymbidiums and our Coelogenes. In here again, we've got, if you look down the greenhouse, we've got shelves so we can fit lots of plants in here. Again, we've got warmer up at the top and cooler lower down. We've had to leave a bit more space here because a lot of these plants are much bigger than the ones in the cloud forest. And our really large plants in here, we tend to grow in baskets. So running through the middle, we've got lots of our Dendrobium nobiles hanging up there in the ceiling. Let me move on past. Other plants we have in here are things like our Stenoglottis. So we've got 3 species of Stenoglottis and some of the warmer growing Pleones. I'll just reach across. So this is Pleone lagenaria, which is one of the autumn flowering Himalayan species. Let's take that one across. Right, we'll head out to the greenhouses. So there's our greenhouses. And I'm going to take you indoors to have a quick look at how we grow warm orchids, because we've got greenhouses there running at 12 and at 7 degrees, which obviously isn't going to be great for our Phalaenopsis species. So let's move into the house. And if I come into the house, I'll show you where we grow our warm orchids. So I'll come through this way. There are various orchids hanging about as house plants everywhere. I won't take you to every room of the house, but in here we've got our main warm growing orchids, and they are in these IKEA cabinets you can see behind me here. So these IKEA cabinets, we've added grow lights and we've made the shelves waterproof by adding some pond liner, etc. And this is where we grow things like our species Phalaenopsis we've got in here. And at this end, we've got mounted plants. So we put a mesh in there, that's Rhinanthera monochica. And this is also the place that we deflask our seedlings from the lab. So if I open this one, got some lovely seedlings down. Oops, almost dropped my phone. There we are. Lovely seedlings down here of Dendrobium Victoria Regina, which are now about 1.5 years out of flask. So those will be ready for selling. I did mention the lab, so let me give you a quick look in there as well. So our lab used to be a downstairs bedroom. And this is where we've got, obviously, our plants in vitro growing in shelves. And we've got 2 laminar flow cabinets behind me, which is where we do all our work. A couple of other spaces of interest before I move on to talking about habitats. This is our downstairs loo, and it's a perfect place to grow cool cloud forest orchids inside the house. So this faces east, but is very shaded by next door's house. So they stay nice and cool in here at all times. Whereas in here, we have got a nice extra spot for warm miniatures. And this is a terrarium we've recently put together, which is where we grow small warm species. As much as anything, to get better at using terrariums, because we've got so many customers now that grow their orchids in terrariums. Right, I'm going to share some information with you. Hopefully that tour has been useful, and I'd love you to email me some questions afterwards. I'm just going to share a screen with you and take a quick look at why it is we grow the plants we do the way we do. So a quick map here, you can see Portland in the middle. And what I've highlighted is the forests we've explored. And of course, a lot of those I explored when we had the Rithington School Orchid Project, which, by the way, is doing great. I retired, is it 1.5 years ago? And it's been taken over by the science faculty who are doing great things. I don't think there'll be lots of shows, but they're doing lots of work with other schools. So let's move on a bit. So I mentioned our first greenhouse we call our cloud forest greenhouse. This is what we're basing it on. So this is cloud forest in Costa Rica. That's on Mount Poas at about 1,400 meters. And what you can see you get with cloud forest, of course, is trees where you can hardly see the trunk or the branch. They're so covered with epiphytes. This is a forest which is cool and really wet. So what we found is it rained every single day we were there. If it wasn't raining, it was pretty misty. And you've got tall trees here because you've got very rich volcanic soils on the side of the volcano. So this is a place we found lots of pleurophthallis and masdevallias and Prosthechia. Brassavola was one of the most dramatic orchids. But to see the orchids well, you had to be a bit lucky and find a fallen tree so you could see what was going on up in the canopy. The second cloud forest I've got for you here, this is the one we've explored in Brazil. So I don't know if any members of the society went to visit Dick Warren's place over in the Mata Atlantica, but that's the forest there now. This happens to be in the dry season, and I think you can tell by the mist. The thing that makes cloud forest special is the fact that even during the dry season, or any dry season that happens, the forests are still dripping. And what we found is every afternoon at about 4 o'clock, the mists came down. The forest was full of mist all night. And as I said, by the morning, the forest was completely dripping. So the orchids were wet again. And some of the orchids, I showed you Cattleya coccinea in the greenhouse. So here it is growing in the wild. Notice that it's growing in really good light. So here the forest, unlike the one in Costa Rica, is a really dwarf forest because the soils are very thin and low nutrient. It's growing up on ridges, so lots of light. It's clearly getting a lot of moisture. You can see from the moss that's on the branches here that it's going to be pretty well watered all year round. My flowers haven't been quite as bashed as these have by the weather, but that's what we're trying to do, is to grow them in similar conditions. If we come a bit down off the ridges, then we find the diversity of the Pleurothallidinae that particularly excited us well when we were here. So we've got Pleurothallis grobii, is the small flowered one, and Pleurothallis sclerifera is the larger one. But the diversity of these was fantastic. Again, you can see from the mossy picture just how wet this forest is. Some of the other spectacular ones, this is Pleurothallis truncata, which comes from Costa Rica. We've got Pleurothallis ampera ona, which is also Costa Rican. This was particularly popular when I was at school because we used to call this the fluffy toilet seat orchid, which you can kind of see why. About the smallest flowering epiphyte I've seen in cloud forest is this Platystele compacta, which is only about 1 centimetre across the whole plant. Let's keep moving on. Okay, so our cloud forests, though, aren't just in Central America, in Costa Rica, and South America, in Brazil. You also find them in forests on mountains near the equator, pretty much anywhere in the world. So this is Rwanda, and the birds you can see there are great blue turacus, which one of the birds we came across quite regularly. Thankfully, I've not got any of those in the greenhouse. I think they create a bit of mess. But next to it, you've got an orchid here. This is Polystachya virgini, and it's growing very much like the Pleurothallis species that we saw in the Americas. There are other cloud forests, of course, right across Asia, Papua New Guinea in particular. But I'm going to start looking now at some of the seasonally dry forests. So the cloud forests are wet all year, and that's how we're growing the plants in that greenhouse. We've got other orchids which really need much more of a difference between summer and winter. So here we've got Dendrobium chrysotoxum growing on a tree in southern Laos. And you can instantly note differences here. There's hardly any moss on the trees. The forest is much more open, much less in the way of epiphyte growth because of the fact you've got a significant dry season. And of course, dendrobiums like this one have got a great pseudobulb there to be able to cope with surviving the dry season. Generally, they flower towards the end of the dry season, and then there'll be plenty of water around for when they do their growth. What we're looking at here is forest in Sikkim. So this is at a lovely place called Tinkitam, which is at about 2,000 meters in Sikkim. This again is the dry season. So have a look at the amount of moss on the trees and the amount of mist that's going on here. So this is Coelogene cristata in the wild, and I've done an inset here of Cymbidium devonianum. So there's a bunch of cymbidiums that share this habitat with Coelogene cristata. So Cymbidium erythraeum is in the top of the trees. We've got Cymbidium elegans is quite common. And as you can see here, Cymbidium devonianum, which tends to grow much lower down with its thick leaves, it really prefers much more shade. I'll do a close-up on a couple of the Coelogenes. We've got Coelogene cristata on the left and Coelogene holochila on the right. Again, both growing in this forest in Tinkitam. And if you look closely, we are at the end of the dry season and it's flowering, and the bulbs really aren't shriveled, which shows that these plants, although they have a cooler and a drier winter, it really isn't that dry. So imagine the summer here when you've got a monsoon, it's raining very hard every day. In the winter, it's the mists, and we've had rain about once a week at this altitude during the dry season, which is keeping the bulbs plump and the plants don't completely dry out. This is Coelogene nitida. This is flowering in Assam, further along the Himalayas, and we have got Cymbidium erythraeum growing with it. So this is on a branch. You can see they're sharing the branch with quite a lot of ferns and other epiphytes. So there is a bit of a fight when you get yourself up onto a nice branch in the sunshine with plenty of water arriving in the summer with the monsoon. Okay, so those are our greenhouse habitats, the cloud forest and the cool seasonally dry Himalaya style forest. I'm going to take you to lowland warm forest next and introduce, this is a friend of mine, the proboscis monkey. So when we came ashore by a small boat on a reserve on Borneo, he was sitting up on the local cliff observing us and having a good chew of the local leaves. Now, this forest, as I said, it's on the equator. The locals claim they have two dry seasons during the year, but both of them are fairly short dry seasons, and it's still pretty wet. So we still needed our coats during their alleged dry season. And what you find here is a lot of Phalaenopsis species and warm-growing Coelogenes are the sort of plants you can come across in the forests. So in these forests, I said it's wet, it rains a lot, but with the heat that you've got, the forest does dry out very quickly in between times. So I've got the weather app for Kuching in Sarawak on my phone. I keep getting it up by mistake and discovering that today's weather is hot, reaching 32 degrees. There are thunderstorms and the nighttime temperature will be 24. And it doesn't matter what time of year I look at that weather app, the weather forecast is pretty similar. So we're looking at hot, warm forest that gets plenty of rain but dries out in between times. As I said, the minimum is actually around 24, but we can't afford to heat to that. So our cabinets you saw earlier run at a minimum of 17, and the plants are quite happy. I guess they don't grow quite as quickly as they would if they were back at home in Borneo. Some of the other orchids we discovered in these forests here, this is Paphsandrianum, absolutely stunning plant, horribly rare and a delight to find it still growing happily in the wild, thanks to the protection of the local authorities with their wonderful national parks. So I do recommend Sarawak to anyone who wants to see lovely lowland forest. Um, I mentioned Phalaenopsis. They're not just found near the equator. So this is Phalaenopsis mannii, and this is in hot lowland forest in Assam. And in Assam, there's a bit more of a dry season, but the plant copes through that by being in deep shade. So this is hanging at the top of the trunk of a really large tree. So it's very well shaded from the canopy above. But I like to put that in because I think that would win a prize on most show benches. Really beautiful. Notice, of course, as well, it is growing downwards. So it's never going to have the issue of water sitting in the leaves that might cause those leaves to rot. So I've shown you three forests, haven't I? We've looked at cloud forests, we've looked at the cool seasonal forests of the Himalayas, and we've looked at hot lowland forests near the equator. Of course, there's loads of orchids that aren't quite in any of those habitats. And so if we look at lowland Sikkim, we've got a very strong wet season, dry season, but it does get much cooler in the winter than it does in the summer. So this is where you might find Dendrobium nobiles. They're at about 1,200 meters is where we tend to bump into those in the forests, which means they have a warm summer and a cooler winter, probably not quite as cool as our greenhouse, but they seem to manage all right. And we've got Vanda, I'm going to remember it in a minute, which is growing there down on the lowland forest, where there's no moss at all. So that has a really cool, dry winter time. Also dendrobiums here. So these are dendrobiums that tend to lose their leaves to cope with the dry season down in the lowland forest. So I mentioned our Dendrobium aphyllum plants when I was in the greenhouse. That's Dendrobium aphyllum flowering in Sikkim on the left. And you can see it's completely leafless when it comes around to flowering. So for us, we find that we can grow it warm during the summer and then put it in the roof of the cloud forest greenhouse where we keep it dry in the winter to cope with those. So using the microclimates is really important. And as just a reminder, so here's the first greenhouse I showed you, the cloud forest greenhouse. So we've got microhabitats going from bottom to top, where the ones at the top are warmer and drier, and the ones at the bottom are cooler and damper and more shaded. And we've got the shelves where we can do the same. I mentioned we've got lots of plants that are mounted. So again, we tend to grow those a bit lower in the greenhouse, so they're a bit more protected, but they do seem to enjoy plenty of light. So we do keep as much as we can. In the summer, we might well be watering these twice a day just to make sure they don't dry out. And really throughout the year, we water them every day if they're mounted plants. And we've got our small orchids growing in little pots in trays. We find these trays to hold your small pots in are really useful. They have a bit of dampness that hangs around in the bottom of the pot, which is useful in stopping your plants drying out. But you'll notice we like to use a really open compost, even for our very small orchids, so they've always got plenty of air to their roots. I mentioned masdevallias, and they tend to grow kind of in the middle. So up at the top, we've got the Barkarias. Down at the bottom, we've got the mounted miniatures, and our masdevallias are more in the middle. And there's some of the plants we grow near the top that I showed you earlier. That's Wittigiana, which has just finished flowering over on the left. And of course, we can fit a real diversity of plants in there. I mentioned Papua New Guinea and its cloud forests. So we've got Mediocalcart decoratum on the bottom left, which is from Papua New Guinea, as well as the miniatures from the Americas. We've got a Tricitella at the bottom, and we've got Platystele mesaziana top left. And we've also got Dendrobium densiflorum, which is definitely not a miniature and fills a big section of the roof of that cloud forest greenhouse. I talked about watering. We water with a hose so that we can water our plants quickly and effectively. And our hose connects to an indoor rainwater storage tank. And we've got outside tanks that store 4,000 litres, so we can get plenty of water and never have to resort to using tap water. We tend to feed between 300 and 500 microsiemens. And I would never be out without my conductivity meter to find out what's going on. So tap water here is at about 450 microsiemens, which would only allow us 50 microsiemens worth of plant food to top it up. So much better if you can use rainwater, and so most of the dissolved salts are ones that are useful to plants. The biggest issue we have is the type of rain that falls on our greenhouse, and I'll show you a picture of that later. Here's our shading. So we shade externally. So we've made wooden frames that screw to the outside of our aluminium greenhouse, which makes it easy to put the shading on and off. That's got a single layer of shading, so that's probably about April time, and we'll add a second layer of shading to some of that greenhouse in time for the full summer. So this is our issue with rainwater. I don't know how many of you are affected by massive storm waves crashing into the coast about 300 yards from where your greenhouse is. So when the weather is like this, what we have to do is take away all our downpipes so that none of the seawater that's raining on our greenhouses gets into our rainwater tanks. So we do have to be a bit careful in terms of our water quality, and that's where the conductivity meter comes in. Here's our Himalayas greenhouse. As I said, not just Himalayan. So there's the Lilia anceps plants on the way in, and then Coleogenes, Cymbidiums, Pleonies, and a good mixture of plants that love it cool. There's a few of our Coleogenes. So we've got Coleogene cristata, nitida, and barbata. Some of our Cymbidiums. We've got elegans, suavissimum, and insigne. And some of the other things that grow with them, I mentioned the Lilia anceps, our Dendrobium nobiles. We've got some of our odonts seem to really appreciate that. That's Miltonia cuneata up on the top right, and then Stenoglottis and Pleone down at the bottom. I showed you our indoor cabinets. So a little reminder, we grow these at 17 degrees minimum. That's because that's where the thermostat is set for us. It's a room that faces north, so there is natural light, but we've supplemented it with LED grow lights, which were very easy to attach to an IKEA cabinet. And this is where we grow our Phalaenopsis species, as well as lots of mounted warm, mostly miniature tropical plants. So there's always the odd big one that, like the Rhinanthera monochica, that sneak their way in. We just can't resist it. And yeah, so some other bulbophyllums, Bulbophyllum rothschildianum, and Arangis. That's Arangis rhodosticta. Arangis luteolba var rhodosticta. And that's one of about 10 different Arangis species we've got in our collection there. And you can see we've pollinated one of the flowers there. There's a seed pod forming. And really our hot collection there is very much to produce seed that we can then use in our propagation lab. We do use, as I said, all our spaces. So our large warm orchids tend to grow upstairs in our bedroom. So with Velux windows, we have got some wonderful light. And Sobralia macrantha flowering on the left. And what used to be Dendrochilum, but is now Coleogene latifolia, top right, and Cymbidium dayanum, which is one of the warm-growing Cymbidiums. I hope you've enjoyed seeing what we've got here. Do have a look around our website. We've got lots of interesting things, I would hope, there. We have an Orchid of the Week where we feature a variety of plants from our collection. We've also got an online shop. So we sell through Etsy. So keep an eye on that. I mentioned Orchid of the Week. There was one of the ones last week. So we talk about where they come from and how we grow them. And we also have pages that look at the different culture and how we produce our terrarium, that sort of thing. I've come to the end. As I said, I hope that's worked well for you. I'm really sorry that I'm not here to answer live questions, but I really hope to meet all of you sometime soon in the future. Thank you very much.